لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. نهاية التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير ونفع الانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والدعوة للهدى والآلاف الخير حتى أتمسك بكتاب الله الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So, today's class, okay, just bear with me, don't look at what's on the wall yet. Today's class, we're going to be looking at the topic of Aqidah. The topic of the lectures is called what? Overall, these lectures are called what? From the sisters, the overall name and the theme of these lectures is called, somebody from the girls with a microphone, overall it's called what? Come on man, you come to a class and you don't know what the title of the lecture series is. Put the microphone. How Allah preserves Islam. Not exactly like that, but Allah's promise, the miracle of the preservation of Islam. Alright, that's what we're talking about. And what we've found over the past few weeks that before the class begins, or when the class begins, I normally share with you some news articles in which we get an insight into how certain young men and women have gotten a distorted understanding of Islam and have gone on to do things or about to do things. And last week I gave you several examples for those who were here last week. I gave you several examples. And in the last week, there's another example. So these are things that are happening pretty much on a weekly basis. Alright, so Jamie, Bismillah, just want to read out the title. This is the 12th of November, last week. That's Tuesday maybe, yeah? Tuesday? Okay, Bismillah, Jamie, tell us.
Teen wanted to teach extremist beliefs, court told.
Okay, this is on the BBC. Alright, keep going.
A teenager gained a place at an Islamic Sunday school in order to teach her extremist beliefs to young children, the court has heard. Samilia.
Yeah, I struggled as well, so
Yeah.
anyway, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but anyway.
19 from Windsor saw it as a duty of her Islamic faith to wage a war against non-believers, it is alleged.
All non-believers, it's her duty to wage war. This is a woman, young woman, 19 years of age, who had these views, and we're going to find out how she got these views, because she's still ongoing in a court case. And she, in order to spread her views, it's claimed that she got herself into a madrasa teaching young children, and she had books, as we're about to find out, printed, in which she's going to teach her particular views. That's the context. Keep going.
She's on trial at the Old Bailey, charged with 4 counts of disseminating terrorist publications and 1 count of possessing a document for terrorist purposes. Prosecutor Gareth Wheatman said she arranged for copies of a booklet called The Little
Muwahhideen. The Little Monotheists. That's what she called it. A children's cartoon, colourful book in which she's going to teach extremist views. So imagine that. Your little brother and sister go to this weekend madrasa, mashallah, and then the teacher is teaching all these weird and crazy ideas about killing people. That's why she's in court. Okay, keep going.
The book had a colourful cartoon style, but included sections dedicated to the waging of war for Islam and defined jihad as obligatory fighting for Allah, the court heard. The book also had a section referring to hatred for the sake of Allah. It is not just about teaching the basics of Islam, but indoctrinating young minds, said Mr. Wheaton. He said police found the defendant had drawn up a list of planned lessons starting in September 2022, referencing pages of the Muwahhideen book she would refer She also sent a draft curriculum to the chair of the Tawheed Islamic Education Center in Maidenhead, which provided weekend classes for children. It follows this wasn't a distant dream of the defendants to teach young children the extremist and intolerant notions in this book, Mr. Wheaton said. She had printed it and arranged to attend classes to do so. The prosecutor said this was not only the location where Miss Timeva was seeking to teach young children. In March 2023, an investigating officer found her name listed as a teacher for the Windsor Muslim Association. Juniors were also shown an ISIS video entitled Incite the Believers, recovered by police from the defendant's mobile phone in October 2022. The video calls for jihad and encourages the viewer to carry out attacks by using fire, by burning buildings, forests, and agricultural land.
That was on her phone.
Also found on the defendant's phone were notes written under the title of permissibility of suicidal operations, the court heard. Jurors were told another note was called The Woman I Want to Be / Ideal Version of Myself, which referred to being the mother of the soldiers of Allah and one who raised them and incited them to jihad. The prosecution suggested the notes provided an important insight into how extremist the defendant's mindset was by 2022.
This one?
A teenage teacher wanted to indoctrinate British children about jihad and spread her extremist views via a cartoon-style book, the court has heard. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name.
Alright, let me give you something else to do.
In September 2022, Timeva had been making arrangements to teach a class of children at an Islamic faith school and made reference to the booklet in planned lessons, the court was told. She sent an electronic copy of the book to a contact at the Tawheed Islamic Education Center in Maidenhead and had 70 copies printed, it was claimed.
So, that was just last week. That was just in the past week. What we have is a woman, 19 years of age, and she has these very extreme views. And there's another article in which she's actually watched videos that are, she'd probably go to jail just for watching the videos that she was watching, because the type of things she was watching are things by known extremists that it's illegal to watch in the UK. But these are actually things that in and of themselves are illegal. But the point is that was the last few days. A woman who, 19 years of age, probably some of you are here at the same age, completely radicalized, has all these weird views about killing the kuffar, so on and so forth, ISIS related obviously, and she gets herself onto potentially as a teacher, as an ustada, to go and teach in a children's Islamic madrasa on the weekend, and she prints out 70 of these little booklets, colourful booklets, in which her views are espoused. And the whole point of it is to try and teach young children jihad and killing and so on and so forth. That was last week. She's currently in court. If you want to keep an eye on what goes on and what comes out of that. It'd be interesting. But again, subhanAllah, I didn't think I'd find anything, but there we go. And next week, Allah alam what we'll find. But every week, we seem to be finding something which indicates there's a problem. Is there not a problem? I can see a problem. Every week I'm pulling something out that is no longer hitting the front pages anymore because it's so common. But that's a woman. Someone taught her. Someone gave her those views. And indoctrinated her and gave her the motivation to go and start teaching young children. Okay. Anyway, the point of the class is what? Allah's promise, the miracle of what? The preservation of Islam. Islam has been preserved, and Allah's promise we can all see and witness. Somebody asked me like 2 weeks ago, why did you put up those news articles in the beginning? What's the connection? And can anybody tell me what I said? What is the connection between those articles and the actual content of the class? Is there a connection? Or is it just there for fun? It's not exactly fun, is it? But is it there? What's the purpose of me mentioning those articles in the beginning? What connection does it have to the topic? Anybody want to suggest a reason why? Jamie, with the microphone.
Gaining knowledge in the topic we're talking about is how we can potentially prevent these kinds of things.
Alright, gaining knowledge protects people from falling into these type of mistakes. But she would argue that she has knowledge, she's been taught.
Misinformed on how to get knowledge and where from.
Okay, yes, so the correct way of understanding Islam in the correct manner, that is what is missing, and that's the point of the class. Allah has preserved this religion, the Quran has been preserved, the Hadith has been preserved, but the correct interpretation of those texts has also been what? Preserved. And that's the point. Bismillah. Alright. Jamie, read.
Recap. Allah's promise to preserve this faith. Number 1, the Quran and Hadith be preserved. Number 2, the correct methodology of how to protect them also preserved. Number 3, this correct methodology was developed by the scholars. Which scholars? Number 4, the vast majority of scholars the vast majority of the time.
This is everything that we've agreed upon so far in the lectures that we've done, alhamdulillah, that there is safety in following the majority of scholars. There is what? Say it again. There is safety in following the majority of scholars. And I've proven that over the past several weeks by giving the hadiths and verses of the Quran indicating that the majority cannot all be wrong all the time. The vast majority of scholars cannot be wrong for the vast majority of time in terms of their how they interpret the faith. For all of them to be wrong all the time? No. Allah promised to preserve this religion, and that is done through the ulama, and we've done that previously, nothing new there. Alright, and again, the 3 dimensions of our religion, the Jabriyya hadith, we know this is nothing new. Islam and Shahada, the 5 prayers, Zakah, and fasting and Hajj. And that has been preserved by, we mentioned the madhabs. Then we have Iman, belief in Allah, His angels, the scriptures, the messengers, the last day, and destiny, and ihsan, to worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you can't see Him, know that He sees you. This is based on the Jabriyya hadith. The past several weeks we've been looking at the fiqh, the 4 madhabs, which is born out of understanding the 5 pillars and beyond the 5 pillars. And we've dealt with that and answered a lot of questions. We've looked at a case study around bid'ah and looked at what that means. Today is a different subject. We're going to look at the second part of this hadith, Iman, which is the subject that comes out of this part of the hadith. It's called Aqidah. It's called what? Aqidah. Play Bismillah. Alright, so the question is this. What's the question? Jamie? microphone close to your mouth.
How has Aqidah been understood, preserved, and transmitted by the vast majority of scholars and the vast majority of our history? What has been their interpretive methodology?
Right, that's what the question we're going to answer tonight and finish off next week. How has Aqidah been understood, preserved, and transmitted by the vast majority of scholars for the vast majority of Islamic history? And what has been their interpretive methodology? Also, inshallah, at some point we'll answer this question: how to recognize who is an authority and who is not when it comes to Aqidah. Arguably, that question we'll touch on today, but in the near future we'll answer it in more detail. So, question to the audience. Obviously, there's a mistake. 112. Okay. But what is Aqidah? What do you know about it? Have you studied it? Bismillah, tell me what. The microphones are around. Bismillah, sisters first. What is Aqidah? Tell me what you know. Hands up so we can get the microphone to you. If you don't know anything, just say, I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to know what you know. Give Alia the microphone. Make sure it's on, please. Say that again.
The oneness of Allah.
The oneness of Allah. All right. Anything else? Any? Huh?
The 3 parts.
Okay. Sisters? Anything else? Other sisters? Girls, right at the back. Does you need mic? Can you pick your voice? It'd be good if you guys sit a bit closer so the microphone can reach you, because now you have to bring the microphone right back.
I mean, it's wrong, but I think Aqidah is the beliefs.
The beliefs.
The belief.
Beliefs of who?
Muslims.
Okay, great. It's not okay. You get the microphone back, please. Guys, Bismillah, brothers. No, not you guys. Other guys. I get you guys. There's plenty of time to answer questions that you guys probably want to ask. Zakiria. Give him the microphone. What is Aqidah? Alright, 6 pillars of Iman, yeah? Come on, somebody else? What do you know? What do you know about it? Anybody else? Jamie, anything from you?
Not anything that...
Microphone.
I don't have anything outside.
Alright. Anybody else want to add anything? Ayo, Fatiha.
And is it also what Allah cannot be?
Okay, what Allah cannot be. Interesting. One thing? From yourself? No, actually, we'll keep you guys to the end. Spoiler alert. Okay, and yeah, Kareem?
I was going to say Islam is for fiqh, Iman is for Aqidah, and then Ihsan is something else.
Tamam, okay. Alright, good. Tayyib, Bismillah. Okay, so we're looking at the science of Aqidah, also called the science of Tawheed. It can also be called the science of Kalam. All 3 words are used interchangeably to mean the same thing. So if you see these words, Aqidah or Tawheed or Kalam, they all mean the same thing. It's the science of Aqidah. Alright? And specifically, as what's already been mentioned, Aqidah deals with these 6 things: belief in Allah, His angels, the scriptures, the messengers, the last day, and destiny. Alright? So Aqidah, as Kareem mentioned, is nothing to do with fiqh. Fiqh are the rules of jurisprudence. Now you have the 4 madhabs that we follow on. In Aqidah, it is a different subject matter altogether. No less important, but it's a different subject matter altogether. Fiqh deals with salah, zakat, hajj, and the rulings, marriage, divorce, how to govern, so on and so forth. Aqidah deals with beliefs. What is the belief system of the Muslim? Alright? So therefore, it focuses on those 6 things, which is taken from the hadith. Okay? So that's the first thing to have the context in mind. Aqidah or Tawheed or Kalam deals with one's understanding of these 6 pillars. Alright, what do you see? Huh? Give it the microphone. What do you see?
A circle.
A circle. Alright, what colour is a circle? What colour is the circle? Blue. Anything else you can see on that circle? Muslims. So that circle, right, has all the Muslims, all the different views that Muslims have are in that circle. Every single Muslim who says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, we place in that circle. Every single Muslim, regardless of their particular beliefs, we put them in that circle. And that's everybody, right? Anybody that says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah is in that circle. Great? But then what we have within that circle another circle, and that circle says what, Jamie?
Sunni Orthodoxy.
Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Which means that within the general Muslims, there are a group of Muslims who are orthodox. What does orthodox mean? To keep it simple, these are Muslims who follow the Prophet, the Sahaba, and the Tabi'een in the most close of ways. Right? And they are called Sunni Muslims. Now, people who are Shia, obviously, they don't classify themselves as Sunni. And we all know that. But we're looking at it specifically from the context of Sunni Islam. That's the context we are looking at it from. So then, with deference to people who are Shia, we're looking at it from the perspective of Sunni Islam. What is Sunni Orthodoxy? What does it mean to be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Okay, that's the topic of tonight, because it comes under the remit of Aqidah. So, not every Muslim subscribes to the general specific beliefs of orthodoxy. Not every Muslim is deemed a Sunni. Why? Because you have other Muslims who from different persuasions. Some may be Shia, some may be Ibadi. They would not be called Sunni. You understand that? Alright? But they're still within the circle, the blue circle, which means what?
Muslim.
They're still Muslim. Very important. Very important. But both these circles, they have something in common. They all say the Shahada, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and they acknowledge facing the Qibla, praying 5 times a day, and eating halal food. Alright? So everybody, regardless of whether they are Sunni or not Sunni, they all fall into the general category of being Muslim. Did we get that? Great. Someone's left their suitcase here. There's 2 suitcases there. The orange one. Okay, good. Someone just left it there. Something happening. Just be surprised. How many times in the airport or train station, if you see a luggage unattended, please tell us. See it.
See it, sorted.
Yeah, that's the one. There we go. So the same thing. Alright, do you understand that? That's very important. A lot of people today don't understand that. Right? A lot of people will be very intolerant of other Muslims. And the third category is non-Muslim. So we have people who are Muslim, and we have the general Muslims. Not all of the Muslims are people who are Sunni or called Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. What does that mean to be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? This is the topic tonight. Okay, this is the Hayat.
During the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it was sufficient for one to restrict his beliefs to knowing the meanings of Surah Al-Ikhlas. Say, He is Allah who is one, Allah, the eternal refuge. He neither beggars nor is born, nor is there to him any equivalent.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. That was the general belief or the general aqidah of the early Muslims and of every other Muslim afterwards. Alright, at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's all you need to know. However, what begins to happen is when Islam begins to expand, it comes into contact with different views. And when people become Muslim, right, they bring views with them that are not necessarily the views that were taught by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that what begins to happen is something very similar to the madhabs, in that the madhabs had to define fiqh, and therefore the ulama in Aqidah also had to develop the science of Aqidah to respond to the challenges that they were faced with. You see? So, the correct interpretive methodology can be found by what the vast majority of scholars have followed for the vast majority of time. History shows us that certain sects of Islam dominated religiously and politically. Certain times within history, there were certain sects, certain groups that had views that were not in line with mainstream Islam, and they had a lot of power, sometimes political power. But they were not representatives of Sunni orthodoxy. Alright, Bismillah.
After the Prophet's departure, Sunni Islam encountered notions and beliefs from misleading groups, each claiming to be the way of the Prophet. Muslims also began to encounter the ancient civilizations of the Near East, Greek philosophy, and had to begin dealing with their philosophical ideas that had influenced the Muslims.
So mashallah, the da'wah is spreading, Islam is spreading, all of these people are now becoming Muslim. But challenges, questions, debates, ideas begin to formulate, and some of these views, some Muslims began to absorb some of these views. Some of the Muslim scholars became influenced by Greek philosophers in terms of their thinking, and they began to develop understandings of the Quran and Sunnah that had a dye or tinge or had an influence from other views, other sects outside of Islam. So here are an example of some of the sects that came about very early on in Islam. The Mu'tazilites or the Mu'tazila, the Khawarij, the Mu'attala, the Shia, the Qadariyya, and the Jabriyya, right? And the Karramiyya. These are just some of the sects of Islam that came about very early on that challenged mainstream Sunni orthodoxy. Because these groups did not have views that were in line with the Sunni orthodoxy. And Sunni orthodoxy became challenged by these groups. And these groups had followers. So there was a problem. Can you see the problem? Is that Islam now, the correct understanding of Islam as far as Sunni Muslims is concerned, is being derailed by these groups. So the Sunni Muslims have to stand up and defend and clarify. And that's what happened. Before we go on, we're going to look at some of these groups. So we will explore these groups and their beliefs. By the way, some of these beliefs are maybe very strange. So don't worry. If someone's squeamish, you can leave. But some of these beliefs of these groups, you're like, really? Muslims actually believed in that? Yes. I'm also going to ask, how many of these beliefs have you come across today, in this day and age? I'm going to ask you. So, listen, let's start. The Mu'tazila. Famous, very famous sect of Islam. Inshallah, we have to know something about them. Jamie, Bismillah.
A school of speculative theology that was most prominent in the 2nd to 4th Islamic centuries. What does this tell you?
Right, what does that tell you? Girls first, ladies first. Oh, microphone. Sophia, what's that? Huh? Saturday or Saturday?
But it was very early on this time.
What was very early on?
Sex were already trying to.
Early on. And how long for?
What do you mean?
From the second to?
Second to the 4th Islamic century.
How many centuries?
2.
So for 200 years, this sect was very popular. Alright, we're not talking about 5 years or 6 years, 200 years. That's why there's a very important point there we have to know. Alright, Bismillah, continue. Wasil ibn Atta, I help you out.
Founder who left the gathering of Hassan al-Basri over a theological dispute. One who commits major sins is neither a believer nor a disbeliever.
So Hassan al-Basri is a famous scholar from the early Muslims, from the Tabi'in, famous. And as he's teaching, a man from the gathering raised an issue and says that if somebody commits a major sin and dies before they make tawbah, alright, we say that's up to Allah, whatever Allah wants to do with that individual. Should Allah punish him, or should Allah forgive him? He'll be forgiven. This individual said, no, they're not in heaven nor in hell. They're in between. Exactly. And he actually had another opinion. He said, well, these groups of people, they're in a part of hell that isn't full on punishment, but a lesser form. So you can see what's happening now is what? They are leaving the scripture, hadith and Quran, and exercising what? What are they doing? Using their speculation. And a lot of that began to happen. And a lot of it was influenced by Greek philosophy, which Muslims kind of looked at. They took some of it, but left a lot of it. You see. Right? Hassan al-Basri then said, Wasil has withdrawn, i'tazala, and his group had a large following afterwards, subhanAllah. His group were known by the name Mu'tazila, from the word i'tizal, which means to be withdrawn. Right? This one man, a whole group of people follow him, and as we're about to find out, politically very, very, very powerful. Alright, Bismillah. Anybody squeamish? No? I hope none of you gets confused by this. Please don't get confused, inshallah. In the interest of knowledge. Alright, there you go, Bismillah.
They deny the questioning of the grave by the angels, Munkar and Nakir.
No such thing as being questioned in the grave by Munkar and Nakir. Nope, that doesn't happen. Some of you may be happy with that belief, but I hope not.
They reject signs concerning the end of time, such as the Antichrist, Gog, and the Magog. Deny the existence of recording angels.
Angels that record deeds, all rejected.
Deny the ascension of the Prophet to
They have the Isra Mi'raj, the night journey of the Prophet. They deny the part where the Prophet goes to heaven. That rejects. Because it didn't make sense to the intellect.
heaven. Don't believe in the vision of God.
In the hereafter, seeing Allah, all of that rejected.
Quran, speech of Allah, was created.
Alright, can pause here a second, right? Sunni Orthodoxy believes that the Quran is the word of Allah, the speech of Allah. The Quran, not the book itself. The Quran is it's kalam Allah. The Quran is the speech of Allah, and therefore the speech of Allah in this context is not created, because Allah is not created. That's the argument. These guys said no, the speech of Allah is created. Word, I get it. Alhamdulillah, a lot of this doesn't exist anymore now. Alright, that last part is word, right? Speech of Allah. Inquisition. Who knows what that word means? Inquisition. It's a Christian word, but it's useful here. Inquisition. Give Ayman the microphone.
Is it to ask on a large scale? Because I know a big historical event in Europe was the Spanish Inquisition, and they sort of asked, what religion do you follow and stuff like that. They got rid of the mosque from Spain.
Right, mashallah. Exactly. Basically, it's as Donald Trump was saying, mass deportation of everybody that he doesn't like or whatever is going on over there. So the Inquisition here, the Mu'tazila group became so powerful that the Khalifa of the ruler of that particular time becomes influenced by this group and begins to enforce these beliefs on everybody. So, people in religious posts, sheikhs, ulama, who were there appointed by the government, you could only be appointed if you had a Mu'tazili belief. If you didn't, they wouldn't appoint you. So what happens now is that there's an inquisition, there's a mass, what did you call it before? What word did you use? Like a trial. Like a trial of all the ulama. This is history. You have to know your history.
One of two examples of systematic theological persecution in Islamic history. Hundreds of scholars were persecuted, tortured, and even killed over the matter of whether the Quran was created or not. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was the foremost of those who stood up to this. The Mu'tazila were dominant religiously and supported politically.
So again, very powerful, a lot of political power. That was a dominant Islam in the age of Mu'tazili Aqidah. So a lot of people at that time, and a lot of scholars, had these views. Alright? And if you didn't, you'd be persecuted. Ahmad ibn Hanbal was persecuted and tortured because he refused to agree with their views. And because of that, he was persecuted. Arguably, he was looked at by the ulama of the Mu'tazila as an innovator. But history tells us otherwise. They were on the wrong side of history, and he was on the right side of history. Listen, let's move on. The Qadariyya and Jabriyya. The Qadariyya claim that man does not, man does not need any divine help in his actions. Rather, it is a servant who creates the act. What does that mean? It means this. Alright? It means that they believe that you create your own actions, independent of Allah's will. You have the power to do whatever you want to do. It's nothing to do with Allah. If you do good, great. If you do bad, that's nothing to do with Allah. Alright? You create your own actions. We say Allah creates all your actions. Alright? So a practical example is this. I did this because I wanted to, and not because of Allah has decreed this to happen. Alright? The opposite is a Jabriyya. And these guys believe they reject the free will of man. We're all being forced. There's no free will. I did this because God made me do it. So one extreme is saying, it's me that's doing it, nothing to do with God. The other extreme is saying, well, it's all decreed and it doesn't matter what I do. And if I stole, if I robbed, if I did all these things, Allah has decreed that to happen. Therefore, it's fatalistic. It's what? Are you guys awake? It's fatalistic, alright? Both of these are extremes, inshallah. Alright, this one. By the way, has anybody come across these views? These two in particular? Hands up, who's come across some of these views? Or similar? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that's quite a bit there. Anybody want to share a quick example of that? No? Ayman, is that hand up or? No? Okay. Alright, here's another sect of Islam that came out. This is the followers of Muhammad ibn Karam, who died in 256. This is again very early on. So who was this man and what did he and his group believe in? He would liken and compare God to his creation. Mushabbah. A more specific example would be that he would say God, Allah, is a body or has a form. In English, the posh word is anthropomorphism. By the end of these next two classes, you guys will be etched on the tip of your tongues. Anthropomorphism. Anyone want to try and say that? Anybody want to try and say that? Huh? Anthropomorphism? No? Shall I pick this one? No? Amen? Ooh. You already knew that word, right? I can tell. Alright. So he, Muhammad ibn Karam, attributed God as a physical being, saying that he makes contact with his throne, which is a place of rest for Allah. So this understanding of tashbih, likening Allah or comparing Allah to creation, or tajsim, anthropomorphism, goes back to that point in time. Okay, this is another example. Muji'a, anyone?
A faction of innovators who assert that disobedience is of no harm to oneself, but that God forgives all sins as long as one has faith.
Don't worry. Do what you want. Allah is Ghafur. Allah is Ar-Rahim. Yes, Allah is forgiving. Yes, Allah is Ar-Rahim. But you've got to pray. You've got to fast Ramadan. You've got to do all of these things. You can't just skip all of that. Allah's so merciful. Doesn't matter if I do bad or not. He's going to forgive me. Alright? That was a whole sect. Whole belief of people.
As a result of this, they frequently neglected their religious rights. It should be noted that although these sects may no longer exist today as recognized groups, several of their beliefs continued and they are heard being advocated by present-day figures who style themselves as reformers, sheikhs, and people of dawah.
Okay, so how many of you have heard of this one, this Muji'a? I've come across people who are like that. Don't worry, you don't have to pray, Allah's going to forgive you. You don't have to wear hijab, Allah's going to forgive you. Don't worry, you don't have to pray. Huh? Don't worry, Allah's going to forgive you. Allah's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. How many of you have heard of that view? I've come across, oh my God, that many. Well, keep your hands up. On campus or at home or, I'm just interested, online, at home?
In general.
In general? Okay, you've heard that before. Anybody want to share a story? The Lab Madhabiyya, Fatima's at a classic and no one's been able to beat that one yet. Anybody want to share a story of in that field, just to wake us up a little bit? Give somebody my microphone.
It was just like someone I know.
Closer.
Someone I know, they were saying, you know how the Prophet is to intercede for us on the day of judgment. He was saying sort of like he doesn't pray and stuff. So he was saying it's fine. Like the Prophet's going to save us. He's going to intercede for us, sort of thing. Like. He was saying
And while we are fully in agreement that intercession of the Prophet ﷺ is valid, the idea the Prophet's going to intercede for me and I'm okay, I don't have to pray. No. He may well intercede, but you just sitting back and Allah's going to forgive me or the Prophet's going to intercede. Obviously that defeats the whole purpose of our religion, which is to practice. you, has anybody come across this? People who say Allah's sat on the throne, Allah's got a physical, literal face and literal hand. Any hands up, anybody? Keep your hands up, put your hands up high. Right, can you do a count of that? 1, 2, 3, girls protected. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, alhamdulillah. Anybody want to share an example of that they might have come across the idea? Jamie?
I saw a debate online between a Christian and Muslim, and the Christian tried to make the argument that there were verses in the Quran that anthropomorphized Allah.
It's better than you. Go ahead, sorry. And? What did the Muslims say?
Then he basically said that it was down to like him not knowing how to read Arabic properly because he like misinterpreted all the words meant.
I think I've seen that video. Anybody else want to share an example where they've come across somebody that believes Allah has a physical form? That how you want to share your... Without sharing any names or people.
I just don't, I can't talk my last one.
Huh?
I just want to talk my last one, but I can't.
What is it?
Shit, no.
I can't hear what you're saying. Huh? I can't hear what you can't hear you. You see.
Oh, you can't.
I can't hear you. You didn't say anything about your accent.
I did last week.
Oh, I apologize.
Because when I was going to micrograph the first day, like the induction, I told my friend about it back home, and a lot of people at the time as well were saying, you know, this actually Aqidah, you should go into it. And they gave me a book that's called The Fundamentals of Islam. No, The Fundamentals of Tawheed. I think they told me to read it, and she said that one of the things that she said was that Allah, like, He sits on the throne, and it shouldn't be like, you shouldn't just say that Allah can't, like, that Allah can be anywhere, you shouldn't say that. And at the time, the way that she was saying it, I can't remember everything that she said, but it did make sense to me. I went to...
Obviously, that's wrong, by the way. You know, it's completely wrong, yes, good. But we're going to look at that. Yeah, we're going to look at... The point is, these sects that have existed 1,200 years ago, in the year 2024, many of you have come across these views. So these views are still bouncing around here and there, which is why I spent a bit of time talking about these particular groups, so you can see these views. This is where they go back to, in history. All right, let's done this one. All right, there's other groups, the Khawarij and the Shia. We'll deal with them next semester. They need a whole separate topic in and of themselves because of the importance of these two groups historically and in the present day, and we'll discuss them, inshallah, if we live long enough, in semester 2. Alright, hey, bismillah.
The people of truth were marginalized and viewed with suspicion as people of bid'ah and misguidance during this time. At certain times in Islamic history, certain sects dominated politically and religiously. People in that era would believe
What they were told.
if
you lived in Iraq under the Mu'tazila and you saw Ahmed ibn Hanbal, the fourth great mujtahid, being persecuted because he refused to agree with what the state-appointed ulama were saying about the Quran and the greatness of the Quran. If you lived in that time and you saw Ahmed ibn Hanbal being persecuted, you would think, like a Mu'tazili, that he deserves it because he's going against the status quo. As a layperson, you'd say, yeah, he deserves it. But the reality is what? He was right. But he lived in a time that wasn't reflective. Of course, we now know that he was on the right side of history, but how many a scholar and layperson at that time were not? So, are you paying attention now? With that in mind, a critical thinking exercise. Alright? How could you tell if the age you were living in was one dominated by a sect? So we mentioned previously, just now, that during Ahmed ibn Hanbal's time, he was marginalized. His views were marginalized. The mainstream was marginalized and looked at as being wrong, as being people of misguidance. Why? Because the dominant status quo at that time, religiously and politically, had a very specific understanding of Islam that was the Mu'tazili understanding. My question, and I asked this a few weeks ago, how could you tell if the age that you are living in is one that is dominated by a particular sect's perspective on certain matters? Alright, think about it, inshallah. How could you tell if you were living in a time that was dominated by a particular sect? It's an interesting question, is it not? How could you tell? What would you... Arguably, Muhammad Arif said to me a few weeks ago that the general lay person, the general Muslim, goes to the mosque and goes home, arguably he would not know, or she would not know, arguably. Right? Which I kind of agree with that. How would you know? At the time of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, okay, the Mu'tazila were powerful, and all the scholars in the khutbahs, in the classes, all the religious posts were by scholars of that particular understanding. So all you were hearing is the Mu'tazili understanding of Islam. So as a lay person who goes to the Jum'ah and goes home, very difficult. So that I do agree with. But back to you guys. How could you tell if the time you are living in, inshallah, is a time, if the age you are living in right now is one that is dominated by a sect or not? Sisters, how do you tell? Put your hands up. Give her the microphone. It's on.
I would say it would be difficult to know if you're older than one side or I think if you're questioning things and you're being shielded.
What's your name again? Your name? Dua. If you're questioning things, okay, great. That's a good point. Questioning. What else? In other words, critical thinking. Critical thinking. Okay, great.
And then if you're trying to look into maybe the opposite side, being shielded from knowledge or
What do you mean shielded from knowledge?
discouraged from actually like researching it.
How would somebody do that? Be careful. Don't go to those classes. Maybe something like that. You'll brainwash you. Perhaps. Okay, I like that. Quite interesting. Okay. Anything else? This is a very important question, by the way. I would say this is the most important question of the night. How do you know? Razan.
If there is persecution of people who are of good reputation and of like a very learned scholar like Imam Hanbal has really good akhlaq and he was persecuted. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So she's saying that if scholars who are known for having good manners, right, and have knowledge that they're being persecuted in the same fashion, or maybe not to the point of being persecuted, like tortured, but maybe they're being marginalized as being people of innovation. Interesting. Brothers, okay, give the microphone to Jamie. You've got the microphone, right? There you start.
You could look to see if the beliefs that are being told to you today differ to the ones that have been held in like recent and further history.
Oh, I like that. Alright. You could look at the beliefs, keep the microphone with you. you could look at the beliefs that you have and measure them by the vast majority of scholars for the vast majority of time. Is that what you're saying? Very good. I like that. Hamza.
I was going to say government state funding. So I read somewhere like the Ottoman Empire started pushing the Hanafi madhab and some people are against it. But I mean, I would say.
So
like,
I would argue that maybe certain governments may be subsidizing or funding certain types of views. Interesting government, right? We've seen the Mu'tazila at their time, the ruler, the Khalifa at that time, endorsed that. So that became the way for 200 years. Obviously, it disappeared, as we'll find out tonight. Okay, state funded, interesting. Who's paying? That's always an important question. All right, who's paying? Go to a meal, and somebody says, right, let's go out eat tonight. First question, who's paying? All right, depends who's paying. Because if someone doesn't have much money, you kind of restrict it to where you can go. Where's the funding coming from? Because people have agendas. And this is very sad, most people in this age are not going to give you £2 million for a religious cause unless there's an incentive for them to do so. Alright? And one of the biggest incentives is that are you on the same wavelength as me or not? If you're not, you don't get it. Very, very common. Very good, mashallah. Anything else? Ayman.
Find out who you can't criticize.
Give him the microphone. That's very interesting.
Find out who you can't criticize.
Interesting. That's very interesting. If you can't criticize certain people, well, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting these answers. Really, I like that. Okay, so if there's a certain group that you couldn't criticize legitimately, otherwise there's fear, then that's the side as well. Hamza again.
a bit of a weird one, but you see like architecture of a certain mosque or like the interiors, maybe there's like correlation or something?
You were right with the first approach. Keep it simple. Anything else? Sisters, anything else for yourselves? Want to add? Very important question. Anything for the brothers? Shahid.
When the knowledge you get is fear-driven, not love.
Say again?
When the knowledge you get is fear-driven, not love.
If the knowledge you are getting is fear-driven, I know what he means. It's very critical of everybody else. Be careful of that, be careful of him. They're all going to hell. We're right. You hear something like that? It's all anxiety-driven. There's no spirituality. Okay, I would agree with that. Good point. Anyone?
I was going to say, if the imams or the appointed sheikhs within your area or community are consistently promoting teachers and scholars from previous times of one particular belief system or from one particular era.
All right, say that again. Can you hear? Actually, can't hear you. And you've got a microphone.
So, if the teachers or the imams in your local area,
The people around you, the teachers, yes, what are they doing?
if they're consistently promoting or encouraging listening to only specific teachers,
Okay, they're always promoting listening to certain teachers only.
and a certain
And
line of
ex-
scholarship,
Huh?
and a certain line of scholarship,
Certain line of scholarship at the exclusion of who?
the vast majority.
At the okay, vast majority, yeah, which goes back to what Jamie was saying. Then that would be what? A sign that perhaps you are in an area in which a sect of Islam is more dominant. Interesting. Anybody else want to add anything?
If the information you're getting is coming from people who are disrespectful or disregarding previous scholars that have been more respectful in history.
I like that. For the sake of recording, say it again.
if the information and knowledge you're getting is coming from people who are disrespectful or disregarding of scholars in history that were previously well respected.
Excellent, excellent. MashaAllah. Is this a useful exercise or not? Has it got you to think? Has it got you to think of the time you're living in? I hope so. That's the point. To get you to think of the time that you are living in. Want to add something?
I just have
A question at the end. It's always you that ask questions. Play a question at the end. Well known in these classes, the question at the end. Alright, Bismillah, here.
This is the sacred.
Actually, give him the microphone. Give you a break. You've done a bit of time. Okay.
the message. The messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, "This sacred knowledge will be borne by the reliable authorities of each successive generation, who will preserve it and remove from it with the alterations of the excessive, the interpolations of the corrupt, and the false interpretations of the ignorant."
So this is a hadith. Pay attention. This sacred knowledge, this deen, will be borne by the reliable authorities of each successive generation. The ulama in each successive generation are those who are going to carry this deen. And these ulama will preserve it and remove from it any alterations that people have done to it, or any of the excessiveness that people have added to it, or the interpolations of the corrupt and the false interpretations of the ignorant. I'm going to give you a minute just to absorb all that. يحمل هذا العلم من كل خلف عدول له ينفون عنه تحريف الغالين وانتحال المبطلين وتأويل الجاهلين. Alright, critical thinking exercise number 2. What does this hadith teach us about preservation? Before you answer that, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ has said that every generation that are going to be ulama, scholars, who are going to preserve this religion, remove from it any alterations or interpolations and a false interpretation of the ignorance, can only mean that the Prophet knew ﷺ, that people are going to do this. Otherwise, why would he say it? You see my point? He knew this was going to happen. But he also knew that people within every generation are going to protect, preserve, and challenge these views, these extremist views, and these changes and the false interpretations of the ignorant, which is a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, because he knew that was going to happen. And he said, well, he knew that there's going to be people who are going to protect the deen. And that's the point of the lectures, right? Allah's promise to preserve this religion. In every generation, they have come. Allah's manifested it through ulama. But my question, okay, separate to that, that's an extra bonus. What does this hadith teach us about preservation?
It's almost evident in itself to prove that the four knives and the schools of our authorities that the Prophet ﷺ has predicted 1400 years ago, and it's shown us today that it's been preserved. And it's like you said, it's not only Allah's promise for the Prophet ﷺ, but also promising as well that the deen is going to be preserved, and the true understanding of it is going to be preserved, and any misguidance is going to be corrected and removed. to
Yes.
keep them being purified.
Exactly. That's what it means, right? This hadith teaches us that people will attempt to do things. People will attempt to bring interpretations and false interpretations and alterations and the wrong things, but Allah will always bring people to deal with it. And they might not always be those who are the loudest, because they may live in a time where their voices are marginalized. Their voices are not those you hear on TikTok or Instagram. Hint. Alright, bismillah, let's move on.
Allah's promise to preserve His deen manifested itself through scholars who would rise to the occasion and defend the correct Islamic creed from perversion and growth.
So all of these sects now have come about. Those who believe there's no angels, writing your deeds, there's no angels in the grave. Sects that believe that the Quran is created, the word of Allah is created. Sects that believe that you have no free will. Sects that believe Allah's this human body, human form that sits on the throne. All of these sects, and some of them are very strong politically, Allah manifests His preservation through ulama. And just as we had the 4 imams at the time, in the beginning of fiqh, we have 2 imams here that are going to deal with and refute and to revive the understanding of the correct way of Aqidah of the Prophet and the Sahaba and the early Muslims. And these 2 imams are known as
Abu Hassan
Ash'ari,
Abu Mansur
Maturidi. In 2 years from now, you'll be saying it like that. Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So look, you've got four madhabs in fiqh: Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, right? 4 madhabs. All right. In Aqidah, you've got 3 schools. But for tonight, just focus on 2. Inshallah, 2 main schools in Aqidah. 2 madhabs, you want to call it. Maybe that's a crude example, but just to get you over the line. Right. So these 2 imams, interesting, they were both at different parts geographically, but at the same time. Different parts of the Muslim world, but at the same time. And that tells you that Allah, at that moment in time, is kind of bringing these 2 ulama to deal with all these excessiveness and innovations. Both at the same time, mashallah. Unbeknown to each other, as far as I know. Okay, question. Have you heard of these scholars and what do you know about them? Okay, brothers, hands up. Have you heard of them and what do you know of them? Hands up. Just everybody, who has heard of these 2 scholars, 2 girls? Hands up high, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 4. Wave up the other. Huh? You've heard of them first, okay. The rest of you haven't, okay? Nobody's? That's what I'm here for, to help you with that. You guys, how many of you have heard of these 2 ulama? Hands up high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, yeah. How many of you haven't? Hands up high. Okay, great. Alright. I'm going to remedy that for you, inshallah. Okay, bismillah.
Name Ali ibn Ismail, ibn Ishaq, Abu al-Hasan
Ash'ari.
Oh, okay. Ash'ari. The Imam of Ahl Sunnah in tenets of faith,
Come on, you've been recorded, by the way. People are going to see this.
born in
Alright? Microphone. Zakaria. Bismillah. Ayah.
Ali ibn Ismail ibn Ishaq, al-Ash'ari, the Imam of Ahl-Sunnah in tenets of faith.
Tenets of faith is another word for Aqidah. Aywa, born in Basra, 2060 AH. AH means after Hijrah, 260 years after the Prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina. Alright?
A descendant of the companion Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, his great-grandfather.
So this particular scholar, his grandfather was a famous companion, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Alright? And the tribe they come from is a tribe from Yemen. And between him and his great-grandfather are four ancestors. So between him and his grandfather or great-grandfather is four. Right, okay. Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, aywa?
He was a Shafi scholar and founder of the school of tenets of faith that bears his name and reflects his powerful intellect and profound knowledge of the Holy Quran and Hadith.
So he founded the Shafi'i school, but he founded a school in terms of Aqidah. We're going to talk about that. What exactly does that mean? Okay. He originally, I'll take over for a second, originally educated in the school of the Mu'tazilites. So he belonged to the sect of the Mu'tazila. Why? Because that was so famous. If you wanted to learn Islam, this particular sect was all you had. The ulama that were sponsored, that were funded in the mosques and everywhere else were from this particular sect. And he obviously went and learned from them. And a student of the Mu'tazili Sheikh Abu Ali al-Juba'i for 40 years. So for 40 years, he studied the Mu'tazili sect's understanding, and that for him was Islam. Alright? However, one day he asked his teacher a question. He posed a problem to his teacher, and his teacher could not solve the question. He couldn't solve it for him. At which point, something miraculous happened. And this is the point somebody mentioned before about critically thinking and questioning. It was you, right? It's about questioning a teacher. That's what he did. He questioned. And his teacher hit a wall. He couldn't answer. And that for him was like, okay, red flag. And he should be able to answer this. He couldn't answer it himself, by the way, but he's like, I shocked you. How come you can't answer this? Also, he saw the Prophet in a dream, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, 3 times in one Ramadan, who told him, this is where you come in.
Or at least all the positions that have been transmitted from me, for they are the truth. After which he abandoned the Mu'tazilites and became the champion of the Islamic orthodoxy and as a body in the Quran and Hadith.
So he poses the question. His teacher can't answer it. He's shocked. How come you can't answer that? It means that there's something wrong with the understanding here. You should have an answer for this particular situation. These were people who were speculative. They used a lot. So he hit his teacher with a question, a problem, and he couldn't answer it. And that raised doubts in him. And then he had the dream of the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, telling him what? Oh Ali, support the positions that have been transmitted from me, for they are the truth. In other words, what you're hearing, all these things that you've been learning for 40 years from various ulama, that's not my way. That's not my way. Right? After all of this, so it begins by what? He began to do what? Initially, spark, when he began to critically think. He began to question, hang on, this doesn't make any sense. And he went away and began to research. Like somebody said before, to look back at the vast, like Jamie and others, look back at what the vast majority have said. And he begins to uncover something completely different to what he was taught for 40 years. Alright? What the ulama actually said happens is that he, on the day of Jum'ah, he ascends the pulpit in the Friday prayer and says with the loudest voice, there's no microphones back then, whoever knows me, then you know me. And whoever does not know me, I am Abu Musa, Abu Hassan Ash'ari. Okay? The son of so-and-so. I used to say that we will not see Allah in the hereafter. And that people do X, Y, and Z. And he begins to name the views that he used to have. And I make repentance, I make tawbah to Allah from those views. SubhanAllah. So he makes it public. I no longer subscribe to the views that have been dominating politically and religiously for a long, long time. I reject all of that. And he was a great scholar as well. He knew it. He knew the Mu'tazili sect well. And so then he begins to do what? To revive the correct understanding in many, many issues. Obviously, there's a lot of opposition, but he deals with them, and the proofs are so strong that he completely silences the Mu'tazilis. And every other sect, he silences them all with his knowledge. He becomes so famous that the ulama begin to accept what he says. And they begin to follow his views on all of these matters. Okay, keep going.
He openly abandoned this position after finding logical inconsistencies in preserving the faith of Islam from the innovations, Mu'tazilas and other sects. E.g. those that would like and compare God to his creation, the Mushabih, and those that say God is a body or form in dressing, anthropomorphism. He authored nearly 300 books and treatises on all aspects of the faith of Ahlul Sunnah and died in Baghdad in 334. The Ash'ari school, along with the Jabriyya school, has been the standard bearer for the faith of Sunni Islam for most of its history. Imam Ibn Hajar Haythami, one of the greatest authorities in the Shafi'i school, has defined Sunni Muslims, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as those who followed Abu Hassan Ash'ari and Abu Mansur Maturidi, the two Imams of Ahlul Sunnah.
So, what happens now is that people now begin to see the light and realize that all of these different sects now are wrong, but what Abu Hassan is saying and proving from the Quran and Sunnah is correct. So people begin to see the truth of what he's saying, and people begin to follow him. So his followers become known as the Ash'aris. That's what happens. So he did not invent a new set of beliefs. He didn't do that. All he did was what? He revived what people had forgotten. And he called people back to the Aqidah of the Prophet and the Sahaba and the Salaf. Alright? And these other views he rejected. Alright? And we'll talk about how he did that next week, inshallah ta'ala. The other Imam, Abu Musa al-Maturidi, also was important. Give you an idea of time. That's where we are with him, Abu Hassan Ash'ari, and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. They both died around the same time. But Allah, subhanAllah, in Allah's wisdom to preserve His religion, both of these in two separate geographical locations, Allah brought these two, subhanAllah, defend the Aqidah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. To the point where, if you followed these two, it was known that you were following the Aqidah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Ulama began to say that the Aqidah set up by Abu Hassan and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, that is the Aqidah of the Sunni Orthodoxy. So Sunni Orthodoxy became aligned with what these Imams have codified and explained. Right? And both of them from the Salaf.
Few Muslims today know anything about the Ash'ari and Maturidi schools or their relation to Islam. What are the beliefs of Sunni Islam, including its rational theology and view? And what relevance does it have today?
Alright, so we're going to pause there, inshallah. And we're going to round off, inshallah, finish off next week. I want to say a couple of things, that the scholars of Islam, all right, the vast majority of scholars, the vast majority of Islamic history, all right, the vast majority have subscribed and followed these two Imams when it comes to Aqidah. The Aqidah is the belief of the Muslim. The belief of the Muslim talks about the 6 pillars of Islam. Alright? And the vast majority of the greatest ulama in fiqh, in hadith, in Quranic commentary, in how to recite the Quran. The biggest scholars of Islam, the majority, have followed these two Imams in their understanding in Aqidah. These two Imams hardly differed. A couple of things they differed, but majority pretty much the same thing. Alright? Which is also amazing in and of itself. But again, Sunni orthodoxy became closely associated with people who follow these two Imams. These two Imams did not bring anything new. They just revived what people had forgotten about and clarified certain things. But they also dealt with the different sects that were around. And with these other sects who were motivated and inspired by rational thought, these two Imams developed rational thought as an argument. So they took what they were using and threw it back at them. You are saying that Allah does this, Allah does that. Wait, they use rational thought to discredit and disprove the other sects who use rational thought. You see? So they used logic. They used rational thought, rational arguments. This doesn't make any sense. If you are saying this about Allah, but it says this about Allah, and you're going to say that about Allah, then it means this, and that contradicts everything. They came with these rational arguments to defeat them. Because you can't use the Quran and the Sunnah with these people because they're using the Quran and the Sunnah. So you're going to win them at their own game. And they used rational arguments and they defeated them. They also, the Ash'aris and the Maturidis also defeated atheists. Atheism. They proved the existence of God, not through the Quran, because the atheist doesn't believe in the Quran, but through rational thought. And they developed sophisticated arguments that even they couldn't argue against. This is your history that many of you are unaware of. So these are great scholars. We're going to look at a bit more about them next week.